REST-based APIs. Applications use Application Programming Interface or APIs to communicate. To do so, one program can learn the variables and data structure used by another program, making logic choices based on those values, changing the value of those variables, creating new variables, and deleting variables. APIs allow programs running on different computers to work cooperatively, exchanging data to achieve some goal. In an API software world, some applications create an API with many other applications using or consuming the API. Software developers add APIs to their software so other application software can make use of the first application's features. When writing an application, the developer will write some code, but often the developer may do a lot of work by looking for APIs that can provide the data and functions, reducing the amount of new code that must be written. As a result, much of modern software development centers on understanding and learning new APIs, along with the available libraries, pre-built software that can be used to accomplish tasks rather than writing the equivalent from scratch. Several types of APIs exist, each with a different set of conventions to meet a different set of needs. In this video, we will learn about the representational state transfer or REST APIs because of its popularity as a type of APIs in networking automation application. This is the first major section of this video that we take a closer look at REST-based APIs. About a REST-based or RESTful APIs, we can say a REST APIs follow a set of foundational rules about what makes a REST API and what does not. First, from a literal perspective, REST APIs include the 6 attributes defined a few decades back by its creator, Roy Fielding. Those 6 attributes are client-server architecture, a stateless operation, clear statement of cacheable or uncacheable, uniform interface, layered, and code on demand. The first 3 of these attributes get at the heart of how a REST API works. In this video, I'm going to explain a little more about the first 3. Actually, until now we know that when you want to recognize one API is a RESTful or REST-based API or not, you can verify that these 6 attributes are available in that API. Okay, if you find one API with these 6 attributes, you can say that is a RESTful or REST-based APIs. Let me to explain a little about the client-server architecture, a stateless operation, and clear statement of cacheable and uncacheable for better understanding the REST-based or RESTful APIs. About the client-server architecture, like many applications, REST applications use a client-server architectural model. First, an application developer creates a REST API, and that application, when executing, acts as a REST server. Any other application can make a REST API call the REST client by executing some code that causes a request to flow from the client to the server. Let me to explain it in this figure. At step 1 here, you can see we have a REST client and here we have a REST server. Actually, the REST server is an application that has some APIs, application programming interface, and we can use these APIs to communicate with this application. Also here we have another application, and in this application we can create API call to connect to this API, and after that, for example, take some information from the REST server. This is the REST server, the intended application, and this is the REST client. First, let me to show you here the step 1. The REST client on the left executes a REST API call, which generates a message sent to the REST server. I will explain the detail of this message. In most cases, we are using the HTTP, and this is the HTTP that contain the message or the call of the API REST client, actually HTTP, TCP, and IP. I will explain the detail of it. And after that, at step 2, the REST server on the right has API code that considers the request and decide how to reply. And after that, at the step 3, the REST server sends back the reply message with the appropriate data variables in the reply message. Actually, we use the HTTP for sending our request and receiving the reply. We will learn about the reasons why we use the HTTP, but here until now we know that the HTTP is the selected protocol, choice protocol for sending our request to one REST server and receiving the reply with the HTTP include the data that we want. Actually, in this figure shows the use of HTTP. While many REST APIs use HTTP, the use of HTTP is not a requirement for an API to be considered RESTful. All right. We learned about the client-server architecture, the first criteria of the REST-based APIs or RESTful APIs. Now let me to explain about the second criteria, a stateless operation. The stateless attribute of REST APIs means that REST does not record and use information about one API exchange for the purpose of how subsequent API exchange are processed. In other words, each API request and reply does not use any other past history considered when processing the request. For comparison, the TCP protocol uses a stateful approach, whereas UDP uses a stateless operation. A TCP connection requires the endpoints to initialize variables on each end, with those variables updating over time, and with those variables being used for subsequent TCP messages. For instance, TCP uses sequence numbers and acknowledgement numbers to manage the flow of data in a TCP connection. But about the REST APIs, okay, this is a stateless, and here we don't have any information from previous, for example, API call. Here you can see the attributes of the stateless operation. No client state at server. Any state is maintained at client side, only at client side. Here on the server we don't have any state. Each request has all the information to process the, for example, request. Next attribute of REST-based APIs is clear statement of cacheable or uncacheable. To appreciate what is meant by cacheable, consider what happens when you browse a website. When your browser loads a new web page, the page itself contains a variety of objects like text, image, videos, and audios. Some objects seldom change, so it would be better to download the object once and not download it again. In that case, the server makes that object as cacheable. For instance, a logo or other image shown on many pages of a website would almost never change and would likely be cacheable. However, the product list returned in your most recent search of the website would not be cacheable because the server would want to update and supply a new list each time you request the page. REST APIs require that any resource requested via an API call have a clear method by which to mark the resource as cacheable or not. The goals remain the same: improve performance by retrieving resources less often cacheable. Note that cacheable resources are marked with a time frame so that the client knows when to ask for a new copy of the resources again. Alright, to appreciate a few of the upcoming topics, it helps to have a basic idea about how a programming language are use variables. Okay, because of that, here we are reviewing some type of variables like the simple variables, list variables, and dictionary variables. Let me to explain a little about the simple variables. Applications all process data with the same general actions, starting with some kind of input. The program needs data to process, so the input process reads files, sends database queries to a database server, or makes API calls to retrieve